PyQt Basics, getting started with PyQt. Hello everybody, this is Ben Finkel, and in this nugget, I'm going to show you the very first steps that you need to go through in order to get a PyQt graphical user interface, GUI, application running in your system. It's real easy to do. We just need to deal with a couple of objects. Let me show you. In order to get started with PyQt in the Qt library, we're going to take a look at a couple of basic high-level classes in the class hierarchy from the library that are really important for us to get going with. The first one of those is QApplication. It's in the Qt GUI library. And QApplication is going to be sort of a collection for our entire GUI application that we're building with PyQt. We have to create an instance of QApplication in order to run a PyQt application itself. So we are going to, at the very top of our code, create an instance of this. And the really important thing that this QApplication instance is going to do is it will represent the life cycle of our GUI application. Let me explain to you what I mean by that. So traditionally, people develop programs that are very procedural, very straightforward. And what we mean is that the program starts and it runs through to completion, and then it gets to the end and it's done. No problem, right? Well, in a GUI application, we don't have that luxury because we want this window to be up. We want this text boxes and these buttons and these scroll bars, all these different things to be sitting there waiting for the user to do something to them. It's called an event-driven program. And what it means is that the program starts and then it waits. And it waits to receive events. And the events come in, and the events tell the program what to do. So an event might be clicking a button, right? You click a button, that tells it to launch a new window or open up a new page or submit a form, whatever it does. There's all kinds of events. Everything you do to interact with a computer program is an event. And actually, events don't even have to be user-generated. Maybe it's sitting there waiting for messages from another program that's running on the system. So all of that happens, and the program doesn't end until the proper event occurs that tells it to end. But the key there is that it's sitting there in this sort of endless loop waiting for the user to do something or waiting for events to come in before it does anything else. It's called an event-driven program. So we're going to create this QApplication instance, at least initially, primarily so that we can start that loop and watch for it to finish, watch for it to complete, so we know when to exit our program entirely. You'll see that in the code. It's very simple and easy to do. The other class that we want to look at is the QtGUI.QWidget class. And the QWidget class is kind of the top level class for all of our GUI elements inside of PyQt in the Qt library. Buttons, scroll bars, text boxes, etc. All these things are GUI elements. They're individual things that we're going to work with and manipulate and organize inside of our graphical user interface. QWidget is the top level class for all of those things. There's actually higher level classes, more abstract than that, like QObject. We don't really want to work with those. QWidget is the one that we want to work with because not only does it represent all these things, but it's also going to represent the container for all of these things, which is a window. GUI applications these days, whether you're on Microsoft Windows, Linux, all the different KDE, GNOME, all those different window applications, Macintosh, they all deal in windows. So we're going to use this QWidget object to create a window, and then we're going to use it to create some elements inside of that window. Let's take a look at our code now and see exactly how that's done. We've got up here just about the simplest Qt GUI application that I can possibly imagine writing. It's only 13 lines long, and I've actually got 3 lines commented out. I'm going to uncomment those later to show you how it works. So it's really like a 10-line application, but it does so much. First of all, notice that we're calling import Qt GUI. This is really important. You have to have gone through the install process to get PyQt installed in your Python environment before you can do this, but once you have, you import the Qt GUI library from PyQt, and that's, you can see down here, what we're going to use to create our objects. We're going to create an application object like I just talked about. App equals QtGUI.QApplication. And notice I'm passing in the command line arguments, if there were any, into that QApplication. Now, I don't do anything else with that application until the very bottom. Take a look at this line here, status equals app.exec underscore. All that's happening there is I'm calling the application.exec underscore function, which starts my endless loop. Now my program is in an endless loop waiting for user input to do whatever it is I want it to do. I have to program the program. I have to tell it how to handle those user interactions, those events. But the key thing there is that it is inside of an endless loop. And when it's done, it will return a code to status, which I then pass into my sys.exit command. That's what gets me a nice, clean exit out of my program. So that's how app equals Q application, and then app.exec underscore is how I get my never-ending event-driven loop started. Now the other thing that I do here, it wouldn't be very interesting if all I did was start this application and wait for it to end, because it would fire up and then it would be done, is I create a Q widget. Notice it's not a button, it's not a scroll bar, it's not a text box, it's not anything, it's just a Q widget. Well, a Q widget represents a window inside of, in this case, Macintosh, but inside of any user interface. The widget object is the top level object, and it simply represents a window. And all I have to do to get it to appear is call window.show or qwidget.show. That's going to make it visible on my screen. So again, all we're doing is creating an application, creating a window, and then showing the window, and then entering our endless loop. And if we go ahead and run this program, you can see all it did here was it created this little window object on my screen. It put it right in the middle of the screen. It's got some random default dimensions associated with it. But look at all the functionality it's already got. I can already move it around. It looks like a Macintosh window. I didn't have to tell it about these buttons. I didn't have to tell it that it can be resized. It already knows that I can grab the edges of it and resize it. So a whole bunch of basic functionality about Windows is built into that QWidget object. All I had to do was create it and show it. And notice also my program is sitting here running right now until I destroy this window. Now I'm dropped back to the command line. My sys.exit was called. What happened there? I destroyed all of my Qt GUI objects. By closing that window, that destroyed the object. Once I've destroyed all my objects, the program exits out. Let me show you another example of that. Here I've added just a couple additional lines. I've created a second window I'm calling W2. So now I've got two windows, W and W2, that are going to appear when I execute my program. Or at least they should, right? Let's take a look at it in action here. Run my program. Well, it looks like I only have one window until I move it and I realize that they were simply created on top of one another. So now I've got two different windows, two separate windows, and my application, my app.exec, is not going to end until I close both windows. Notice I just closed one, the application is still running. Once I close the second one, my application ends and I'm dropped back down to the command line. So application, Q application, is watching all of the top level widgets that I create, and it's making sure that it doesn't exit until everything has been purposefully destroyed through user interaction or through some kind of event that has been passed into my program. Now those windows weren't very exciting, but that's okay. You can see through some of my commented lines here that we can actually do some fun stuff with these window objects. Take a look at some of the commands that I'm calling here. I've got resize 250, 150. That's actually changing the size of the window. I've got move. That's actually going to move the positioning of the window down to 300, 300. And for the record, most user interface applications, and this is true of Qt GUI as well, record those movements, the 300, 300, from the top and from the left. So 0, 0 is up here, and x, x is down here in the lower right-hand corner. And then you increase each number to move it further to the right or further down from the top. So I'm moving this out to 300, 300. And then I'm also setting the window title, so it has a window title. I'll go ahead and save my changes here. Run it again. And you can see now I've got my two windows. W2 stuck with the default basic dimensions because I didn't change any of that. But W1, you'll notice it got resized down to 250 by 150 pixels. Its starting position was moved down to 300, 300. And it now has a title inside of the window, my first GUI app. So just a couple of real simple commands there, and you can easily manipulate these windows, get them where you want them on the screen, get them sized appropriately for whatever your application is going to look like, and set up some basic parameters about them. So that's it. That covers the basic information that you need to begin working with GUI applications in PyQt. Now clearly the relevant class here is QWidget. We only showed off a couple of commands, but if you bring up the documentation, which can be found online right here, you can see that there are a whole lot of things that you can do with a QWidget top-level class. We'll just jump down to public functions here just to take a look at a few of the functions that are available to you when you're using QWidget. You can see there's a ton of them. So the documentation is going to be really helpful when you want to understand how to work with and how to use these QWidget classes. I highly recommend you bookmark this site, qt-project.org, whackdoc, whackqt-4.8, because all of the Qt widgets that we're going to work with are going to be easily found and easily researched here. We could take a look at something like set tooltip. Let's see what this one does. Just give it a click, jumps you down to it, set tooltip. It holds the widget's tooltip. Let's go ahead and give it a whirl real quick. I'll just minimize this. And I'll say w.set tooltip. This is the tooltip. If I understand how tooltips work properly, I should be able to pop this up, and I'll get window number 2 out of the way. And if I just hover my mouse over the window, it should hopefully come up with a tooltip. There it is. This is the tooltip. So again, very easily looked up some function in the documentation, was able to read about how it worked, what it did, and then modify my window even further. So there you have it. You're up and running with PyQt. You got started, created an application, and created a window or even multiple windows inside of that application so that you had a nice event-driven loop running to run your PyQt GUI application. I hope this has been informative for you. I'd like to thank you for viewing.